This is the Royal Enfield short stroke 350 racer with the big head, cylinder head on it, and a few other little tricks up its sleeve, but all basically things that Royal Enfield could have done for themselves in the early 60s, and it's been quite successful for us in the pre-62 British Historic Racing, and it actually won a championship in 2018 and set a lap record, breaking a previous lap record set by an AJS 7R in 2009. It broke that record 3 times in one race, which it won, and yeah, we managed to also walk away with the championship that year. But obviously we get wear and tear and breakages and things, and then we had the lockdown, and the cams that were in it when it was really successful got worn, and one of them got a couple of broken teeth as well, so we sent them away to be copied. What we got back eventually, I'm just fitting them now, are not exactly the same as it happens, but I'm putting them in, but they got a little bit more lift on them, so I was concerned with how much room I might have for valve lift. Not so much over the piston, because I know that there's a lot of clearance in the case of this one, but as far as valve springs going coil bound and the undersides of valve spring caps maybe hitting the top of valve guides and so on. So I've got the cams in and timed how I want them, and I've still got the valve clearance quite sloppy on the inlet cam. I'm working on the exhaust one at the moment, and I know that I've turned the engine over successfully with no clearance on the no free play on the exhaust push rod, where you can just sort of spin it, which is how you're meant to have it. But just to make sure that I had a margin, what I've done, hopefully we'll be able to see it, if you look at the push rod, the hexagon on the push rod itself, the body, and the lock nut under it, that gap shows us how much I've lengthened the push rod by, from nil clearance to, if you like, a negative clearance of that amount there, which is probably about 1.5 millimeters, something like that. And I've made sure that I can still turn the engine when that valve is going over full lift. So I know that I've got a safe margin there. When the cam goes over full lift, when I back that excess adjustment of the push rod back off to where it's meant to be for the engine to run, because obviously I've not even got any compression now, because the exhaust valve is held open by roughly that amount even when it's going to be shut. So I back the adjustment off, and I know that I've got a safe margin for operation when this engine is running and revving hard. So my next step is to do similar with the inlet cam and valve clearance, and once I'm happy with that, I'll be putting the timing cover back on and making it ready to go. The other thing, that nice little dodge to use, obviously you've got to really know that you're in the zone with your timing, I suppose, and some people might prefer to use degree wheels, and I sometimes do. I'm not a complete animal, but if I think that a valve might be opening, or as it's closing, getting too close to the piston, rather than have the head off and use plasticine, I use a similar method. There's a couple of ways of doing it actually. With the cams timed how I want them, again I'll over adjust the push rods by a certain small amount, maybe not quite as much as that, although not far off, and if I can still turn the engine over the critical point, which is where the exhaust valve is closing and the piston's coming up to it, and also the inlet valve is opening at the same time on the overlap top dead centre, if I can over adjust the push rods by say 1 millimeter or so, and we still go over top dead centre, I know that we've got enough clearance and we're good to go. Another way of doing it is you can have the push rods just adjusted as they normally would be, and in the case of the exhaust cam, just retard it by a whole tooth over what you'd normally have the engine running at, so that makes the exhaust valve shut 18 degrees later, which means that the exhaust valve is hanging around more open as the piston's coming up to it than it would normally be. And if you can turn the engine over, obviously you've got to be very careful how you do it. I mean, I use a spanner on the timing pinion nut there, and obviously if I feel the slightest abnormal resistance, I stop. You obviously don't want to heave on the spanner, but if it will go over the other top dead centre, as I call it, not the compression one but the overlap one where both valves are open slightly, the exhaust valve is closing, the inlet is opening, and if you've got the exhaust cam timing retarded by a tooth more than you're going to run it at, and there's no interference between the piston and the valve, you know that you can put the timing back to where you want it to run at, and that one will be okay. And you do similar with the exhaust, the inlet cam as well. Although in the case of that one, obviously you have to advance it one tooth over where you would normally have it set for running. And if the engine still turns over without the valve touching the piston, you know that you can retard your inlet cam by that tooth, which again is 18 degrees, and you'll be good to go. So that's worth bearing in mind, but it could be hard to follow this, but if you sit down and sort of think about it, it makes sense, because 18 degrees of crankshaft rotation is quite a lot. So if you can get away with setting the cam timings in a danger area for each one, if you like, by one tooth or the 18 degrees, and the engine still turns over, you've got a perfectly adequate safety margin for running the engine when you time it on the marks or the settings that you want it to run on. So hopefully that will sort of be of interest, and rather than mislead or confuse people, but I just thought I'd share that. That's what I do. And my next move will be, as I say, I'll just set the exhaust push rod to the adjustment it should be at, and then I'm going to over adjust the inlet push rod by a similar amount and see if I can turn the engine, and that will tell me whether a valve spring or the valve springs are going coil bound, or whether I'm getting too close to the top of the valve guide with the underside of the valve spring cap. And if all is well, as it was in the case of the exhaust valve, then I'll just set it up to the running settings, and we'll be good to go. Well, if I thought it was going to start that easily, I would film the first attempt. Here we are. It's the first start, and it started first time since 2019. I just fitted the camshafts, the new camshafts, so I'll let it warm up a bit and let things settle down. Got a promising start.